Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the core insights from, well, a mountain of information just for you.
Yeah, boiling it down.
Exactly. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating and, let's be honest, sometimes unsettling world of propaganda and public opinion. And we're guided by the work of one of its most influential architects, Edward Bernays.
A key figure, no doubt.
Our sources. We've got his groundbreaking books, Propaganda from 1928, and Bits from Crystallizing Public Opinion. That was 1923.
Right, and also a collection of articles and notes sort of rounding out his ideas and their impact.
So right off the bat, that word propaganda, it feels loaded today, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Almost always negative now. But looking back at the source material, you see the word's meaning really shifted a lot.
How so?
Well, back in 1842, the chemist Bernays pointed out it was often a term of criticism, associated with secretive groups pushing unpopular views.
Okay.
But then just a few decades later, you have Emerson using propagandists with, no negative spin at all. It was really the 1920s, the exact time Bernays was writing, that it kind of solidified into the more negative thing we think of today.
Right. And this shift happened just as people were starting to realize that public opinion wasn't just there. It was a force.
Yeah.
Something you could potentially understand, maybe even direct.
Exactly. The Allied efforts in World War I really drove that home.
How did that work?
Well, the techniques used to rally everyone behind the war. Suddenly, they seemed like they could work for all sorts of things. And it's interesting, the sources note that before the war, advertising, public relations, people were pretty suspicious of them.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But the war effort, this great Allied campaign to celebrate democracy, as one source put it, it kind of legitimized those fields, weirdly.
So the war gave PR a boost.
Pretty much. After the war, you see big names, General Motors, Procter & Gamble, Rockefeller, GE, they jumped right in, using these newly validated methods to influence what people thought.
Okay, so Bernays is watching all this. How did he start to theorize about public opinion itself?
Well, a really crucial influence for him was Walter Lippmann, especially Lippmann's 1922 book, Public Opinion.
Okay, Lippmann. What was his take?
Lippmann, partly based on his own wartime experiences and thinkers like Gustave Le Bon, he had a, let's say, somewhat pessimistic view of the general public.
Pessimistic how?
He basically believed that large groups, the masses, were often driven by instinct, herd mentality, deep biases, not really by careful reasoning or accurate facts. This led to what the sources call a bleak view, the idea that real democracy, where every single citizen is fully informed and makes totally rational choices, probably wasn't achievable in a complex modern world.
Wow, okay, that's stark.
It is. And here's where it gets really interesting, connecting to Bernays.
Yeah.
Lippmann's analysis kind of suggested that because the public was, in his view, easily swayed, you needed, well, something like a super governmental body of detached professionals.
Professionals to do what?
To basically manage society, filter information, make the big decisions.
Okay, I see the link now. Bernays positions himself as this counsel on public relations.
Exactly. That title itself, counsel, it hints at this sort of lawyerly impartiality, right? He's an objective expert just guiding public perception.
Not just selling something.
Precisely. Bernays wasn't just about, blasting information out. He was about strategically shaping narratives, linking his clients to positive ideas, positive associations.
How did he do that?
He famously used this tactic, the sponsoring committee, to give his campaigns an air of authority.
Like getting experts on board.
Exactly. There's a great early example in the sources from 1913. He got a group of doctors to endorse a play about venereal disease called Damaged Goods, gave it legitimacy.
Right, makes sense.
And later, he did something similar, promoting bacon and eggs as a hearty breakfast. Got physicians to back the idea.
Ah, the classic bacon campaign.
That's the one. And what's fascinating is that this was a deliberate shift away from what they called the old type of salesmanship, just repeating slogans in ads.
He wanted something more subtle.
More scientific, as he saw it, connecting products or ideas to people perceived as trustworthy authorities. The key was realizing people trust messages more if they come from an expert, not just a sales pitch.
Okay, but this whole idea of shaping perception, it makes you wonder about truth, doesn't it? Where does actual truth fit in?
That's the core question, isn't it?
The sources mentioned Bernays had his own stringent code of ethics. They even point out he decided not to work on campaigns pushing cigarette smoking initially anyway.
Yeah, which is significant considering his later work for the tobacco industry, a whole other story there.
But it raises that fundamental issue. if experts are actively shaping what we think, how does the real, sometimes costly truth actually emerge?
Exactly. How do we know what's real in that kind of environment? The sources really flag this. And the tobacco industry is such a stark example.
How so?
Well, even back in the 1940s, you had journalists like George Seldes reporting on the dangers of smoking. The facts were starting to come out.
But nobody knew.
Right.
Not widely.
Right. Because that information was largely drowned out by what's described as an advertising-induced blackout for decades.
Wow.
And fueled by the very kinds of techniques Bernays pioneered. It just shows how powerful these crafted narratives can be, even powerful enough to overshadow documented facts.
Scary stuff.
And building on that understanding, Bernays also theorized about the structures that allow this influence, which brings us to his concept of the invisible government.
Okay, let's unpack the invisible government. What do you mean by that?
Bernays argued that, essentially, a relatively small number of people, often working independently, not coordinating in some secret room, they understand mass psychology, they get societal patterns.
And they use that understanding.
Yes. These are the invisible governors who, as he put it, pull the wires which control the public mind.
That sounds pretty conspiratorial.
It can sound that way, but he emphasized the sheer complexity of society first. All the different groups, the cleavages, social, political, economic, you name it.
Like the lists in the World Almanac you mentioned.
Exactly. All those different clubs, associations, trade groups, they create all these different points of leverage. These governors, often unaware of each other, can use these leverage points to influence how people think.
So it wasn't necessarily a secret cabal plotting together.
Not in his telling. He saw it more as a natural consequence of needing to organize and guide public opinion in a really complex, interconnected world. It just happens.
Okay.
And then he makes this distinction between what he saw as legitimate uses of this power and, well, vicious uses.
All right, let's get into that distinction.
Yeah.
Legitimate versus vicious propaganda.
According to the sources, Bernays saw propaganda basically as just any society spreading its beliefs. At its core, he thought that was perfectly legitimate. Nothing inherently wrong with it.
So where's the line?
The intent. That was crucial for him. Legitimate propaganda was about spreading a truth the propagandist genuinely believed in.
Right.
Vicious propaganda, though, that was knowingly spreading lies or aiming for effects that harm the common good.
Can you give an example of legitimate?
The sources mention the State Department putting out a report on China. The goal is to present the government's view to Americans. The authority of the source, the State Department, gives it weight.
So it's propaganda, but aimed at informing from a specific viewpoint using a credible source.
That's the idea. It shows how even neutral-sounding propaganda relies on sources the public trusts to be effective.
And Bernays argued that this kind of thing, this shaping of opinion, was actually necessary.
Yes, not just useful, but essential in modern society. He pointed out that public support is absolutely vital for any big undertaking, even purely charitable ones.
Like what?
Organizations like Near East Relief or those early campaigns against tuberculosis, they all had to use what he called propaganda just to get the support and funding they needed.
Makes sense. You need people on board.
He gives this really neat example, too, the Velvet Fashion Service.
Velvet Fashion Service, what's that?
Basically, velvet manufacturers worked subtly, behind the scenes, with top Paris fashion designers. They made sure influential people, celebrities, socialites were seen wearing velvet. So then, American consumers saw velvet as fashionable and started buying it.
Without realizing it was a coordinated campaign.
Largely, yes. It shows the power of that indirect influence, shaping what we want without us even noticing the strings.
Which brings us to the role of the Public Relations Council, the agent of influence.
Right. As Bernays saw it, this professional wasn't just a messenger. They were deeply involved in shaping actions, beliefs, systems, opinions, plus promoting actual products.
So influencing pretty much everything.
They were key players in getting ideas into the public mind, using modern media, tapping into social groups, all of it.
Given that kind of power, did he think about ethics, guidelines?
He did. He recognized guidelines were needed. He believed PR pros should operate under a developing code, kind of like lawyers or doctors,
Right.
meaning a commitment to refuse clients who were dishonest or causes that were, antisocial, harmful.
So drawing a line somewhere.
He even described the PR council as being like both judge and jury in the court of public opinion because they had so much power to shape judgments through persuasion.
And he saw this whole thing as becoming more scientific.
Increasingly, yes. He admitted understanding mass psychology wasn't an exact science, obviously.
Right.
But he argued that theory and practice allowed for predictable shifts in public opinion, more or less. It was a move away from just trial and error.
Towards what?
Towards an approach based on observing the group mind, applying principles. He really stressed understanding basic human desires, the steam, which makes the social machine work, he called it. Not just simple stimulus response stuff.
Interesting phrase, the steam.
Yeah. And the power of association group influences were absolutely central for him.
Association, like linking things together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Jackson Heights real estate example illustrates this really well.
Tell me about that one.
Okay, so to build desire for this development, they didn't just advertise houses. They staged a benefit performance with famous patrons. They highlighted the planned golf course. They even used the opening of the local post office strategically.
Why? What did that achieve?
It created desirable social connections in people's minds. Jackson Heights wasn't just houses, it was connected to culture, recreation, community status.
Ah, clever.
Yeah.
Building an image through association.
Precisely. And using group activities, too, like those nationwide ivory soap sculpture competitions for kids.
I remember those.
Right. Another Bernays tactic. Great way to spread an idea, get positive attention, tap into existing groups like schools and families. He knew that shared experiences amplify a message.
Okay, let's shift to business. How did he see PR fitting in there?
Well, the sources point to a big change. Early 20th century, many businesses just ignored public opinion.
Which led to the muckrakers, right? The exposés.
Exactly. But then a more vocal public and aroused public conscience forced companies to actually pay attention, to care about public approval.
And Bernays saw an opportunity.
He saw that businesses weren't just competing firm against firm anymore. Whole industries were fighting for the consumer's dollar.
So influencing public thinking, shaping habits, that became critical for survival.
Absolutely critical. And that's where the PR Council comes in, advising businesses on how to understand public demand, how to respond.
In what ways?
Could be big policy changes, could be small details like how clerks dressed. Examples given include jewelry stores starting to stock mid-price stuff to attract more people.
Meeting the market.
Or banks opening grand, impressive branches to project stability. Even indirect stuff, like luggage companies teaching people about travel fashion that ultimately sells more luggage.
It all serves the bottom line, eventually.
Sometimes it could even be used against negative trends, like promoting soap and washcloths as a healthier option against potentially dodgy cosmetics.
Interesting. What about crises? Did he talk about managing bad news?
Oh yeah, definitely. He saw PR as vital for navigating crises, like false rumors spreading.
Got an example.
The Beechnut Company one is good. A rumor started, and the head, Mr. Arkle, didn't just issue a flat denial.
What does he do?
He framed his statement around local loyalty, community ties, the company's history in the area. It resonated way more deeply than a simple, "that's not true," and killed the rumor effectively.
Smart psychology there.
Definitely.
Okay, moving from business to politics. Did he apply these ideas there too?
Absolutely. The sources note that the entertainment business, actually, which embraced advertising early on, provided some lessons for politics.
But Bernays wanted more than just ads for politicians.
He pushed for a more, again, scientific analysis of the public, understanding voters' desires before you even write the platform.
Like market research for politics.
Pretty much. He suggested using the same kind of analysis businesses use, figure out who's likely on your side, who's a lost cause, where to focus your energy.
Makes sense.
And while he admitted these persuasive techniques work well on voters swayed by group loyalties and emotions...
Which is probably a lot of voters.
Right. But he also believed politicians could actively mold the mind of the voters, shape their opinions by crafting compelling public personas, connecting with influential leaders in different community groups, really working those networks.
He even suggested a new cabinet position.
Yeah, a Secretary of Public Relations, to basically interpret America's aims to the world and connect the government better with the people at home. Quite a vision.
That is bold.
Yeah.
Did he see other groups influencing politics?
He really highlighted women's organizations. He thought they were particularly effective.
Why them specifically?
He credited the skills many women honed during the suffrage campaigns. They learned sophisticated persuasion tactics then.
The suffrage movement as a training ground.
Exactly. And prominent women stayed active in social and political causes after getting the vote. He saw them wielding considerable influence on health, arts, legislation, all sorts of things.
What about educators? Where did they fit in?
Bernays saw educators as critical, not just teachers, but also propagandists in a sense, people who could bridge the gap between academia and the public.
Make knowledge accessible.
Right. He also acknowledged the potential influence of donors on universities and the constant need for broad public support. That's partly why college news bureaus started to manage PR, build those connections.
And social work, you mentioned that earlier.
Yes, he stressed PR was absolutely essential for social work because it relies so heavily on voluntary support, on donations.
That's the biggest challenge there.
Inertia. Public inertia, getting people to care, to act, to change things. That's the big enemy.
And PR helps overcome that.
That's the idea. He talked about how the power to sway opinion used to be limited to elites, but it was becoming more democratized.
Any examples of social work using these techniques?
The NAACP convention in Atlanta is a great one. They deliberately held it there to strategically influence national opinion on civil rights, a conscious use of place and event for social change.
That's powerful. Did he connect these ideas to aesthetics too, like art and design?
He did. He explored how influencing opinion shapes our tastes, even our economic needs related to aesthetics.
So,
He noted manufacturers adapting designs like pianos, becoming more modernist, to meet a public desire for things that looked good, not just functioned well.
so PR could shape taste.
And he suggested even everyday objects, through their design, could subtly cultivate an appreciation for beauty. He praised museums like the Met for trying to engage the public more, make art less intimidating.
What about industry and education? You mentioned donors, but any other links?
He argued that industries actually had a responsibility to share accurate scientific info with schools. He pointed out that business competition often drives research and innovation.
So industry research could benefit education.
That was his view. And he saw new tech, like TV and radio starting up, as huge potential tools for propaganda, for spreading information and influencing thought.
Let's talk about personality. How important was the individual figure in all this?
Hugely important. He tells this story about a financier dumping a business partner because of a divorce scandal.
Why? What's the connection?
It shows the strong link between private life and public trust, especially for powerful figures.
So image matters.
Immensely. Bernays stressed that propagandists or PR councils had to treat personality objectively, ensure the public image matched the real character, or at least seemed consistent.
Any examples?
He mentioned Lindbergh and Roosevelt as people whose personalities and major events kind of shaped each other in the public eye.
Okay, let's track the term public relations itself. You said it wasn't always accepted.
Oh, definitely not. In the 1920s, Public Relations Council got mocked. In Concert for Hell, Hire Hokum, stuff like that. People were suspicious.
What changed that?
Partly, the government itself started using publicity more during the Progressive era, even building it into regulatory bodies. That lent it some legitimacy.
And then the Depression.
After the Depression, PR really took off. Big companies set up PR departments. Industry groups, the National Association of Manufacturers, American Bankers Association got serious about shaping public opinion.
And the field became more professional.
Yeah, much more emphasis on research, strategic planning, ethics codes. It grew up, in a way.
How did Bernays think you actually reached the public? What were the channels?
He was pragmatic. You had to use the established media. Newspapers, radio, later TV. Starting your own channel, really difficult, really expensive.
Did he see any dangers there?
He worried about newspapers consolidating. Fewer papers could mean a risk of a news monopoly, making it harder for dissenting voices to be heard.
But despite these channels, he thought public opinion could still be changed. It wasn't totally fixed.
No, he thought it was adaptable. It's made up of individuals and groups, held together by inertia, sure, but things can shift it.
Like what?
Overlapping groups, people belonging to more than one circle, groups changing over time, people responding to new conditions. Fundamentally, human flexibility.
Can you give an example?
He used the Russian ballet. It reached all sorts of different people by appealing to various interests, art lovers, high society, people interested in Russian culture, multiple angles.
And appealing to basic instincts.
Absolutely, like self-preservation. The example given is promoting hairnets by highlighting the danger of loose hair around machinery. Basic safety appeal.
How do you even get people interested in the first place? Generate buzz.
Timing is key. Strategically timing announcements. Creating curiosity, maybe a bit of suspense like publishers do with books.
Anything else?
Using conflict. Framing campaigns as a fight against some evil, like the early TB campaigns personifying the disease as an enemy to be defeated. Taps into that pugnacity instinct.
What about appealing to ego? The desire to be seen.
Oh, yeah, the self-display motive. Publicly praising people for contributing to a cause, that strengthens their commitment.
Like naming hospital wings after donor.
Exactly, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And identifying key group leaders, influential people who bridge different communities. Getting them on board amplifies your message massively.
He also talked about creating stereotypes. What did he mean by that?
Not necessarily negative stereotypes, more like creating simple, widely understood symbols or phrases to represent complex ideas, making them easy to grasp.
Like Roosevelt's square deal.
Perfect example. A catchy phrase that sums up a whole philosophy. But he also warned that stereotypes can get worn out, become cliches.
Are there visual stereotypes too?
Definitely. Flags, obviously. A scientist in a lab coat with test tubes, white symbolizing cleanliness, quick visual shorthand.
You mentioned hotels earlier. How would he build a hotel's image?
By association. Link the hotel to positive concepts people already value: luxury, exclusivity, history, modernity, whatever fits the goal. It's about transferring positive feelings.
Let's talk media. Newspapers. How did he see their role?
He saw a shift. Historically, papers were about the editor's opinion. Modern papers, he thought, were more focused on delivering news, factual reports.
And what is news, according to Bernays?
A departure from the norm. Anything that disrupts the established order.
He had an anecdote about that.
Yeah, the "dozen dead Dagos" line, attributed to a city editor. A bit shocking now, but it illustrates the point. News is about what's unusual, what deviates. A routine event isn't news.
So how does a PR person make news?
By creating events that are departures. Ceremonies, memorials, special meetings, anniversaries, things designed specifically to attract attention and get coverage. Constructing the news moment.
What about radio? It was newer then.
He saw huge potential there, a direct way into people's homes. He noted rules about presenting all sides on controversial stuff.
So how do you get your message out?
He suggested symposiums for debates, or getting reputable figures to give speeches on nonpartisan topics that align with your goals, using trusted voices again.
But despite all these techniques, he seemed aware of limitations, right? Public judgment isn't always rational.
Oh, definitely. He was quite blunt about it. Political, economic, moral judgments, often based on crowd psychology and herd reaction, not calm, reasoned thought.
So truth is complicated.
He saw societal truths as often being the result of compromise, interpretation, what the group accepts, not necessarily objective fact.
Looking ahead, what did he see as the future of public opinion?
He quoted Professor Bernays, who worried about the growing power of public opinion, especially impulsive reactions from the masses from below.
So a potential danger.
Yes, which reinforced Bernays' belief that the higher strata, educated, influential people, had a duty to inject moral and spiritual motives into public opinion, to elevate it.
Turn it into a public conscience.
That was the phrase, yes.
What about Bernays' own later thoughts? Did his views evolve?
The sources show he became more aware that the public itself was getting savvier about these techniques.
People were catching on.
He thought so, and he believed this might make them more receptive to reasonable arguments, less easily manipulated, perhaps.
Did he apply his ideas to things like peace?
Yeah, he referenced a manual called Take Your Place at the Peace Table, suggesting PR skills could be used for peace advocacy. He really stressed that keeping democracy alive needed active public will and education. People needed to understand why it mattered.
Did he reflect on the PR field itself?
He summarized the progress since 1919, more literature, stronger ethics, more science, academic study, general recognition. He even worked on surveys looking at how universities taught PR or how officials viewed professions like nursing.
Always looking at that interplay between groups and perception.
Always. He revisited his old articles, his WWI work. That idea for a Secretary of Public Relations, he kept seeing it as a safeguard of democracy.
And his advice to businesses and unions.
For business, he had this 3-step plan to sell itself, emphasizing that you had to fix internal problems before trying to change public perception. Clean up your own house first.
What about unions?
He advised them on improving their image, communicating better internally, countering attacks, building morale, similar principles, different context.
He seems to have touched on almost everything. The press.
Stressed truthfulness and independence, especially after the war. Advocated for more research into human relations, human behavior.
What about things like opinion polls? They were becoming bigger.
He thought the public needed to be educated about what polls could and couldn't do, their limitations. He analyzed why some industries, like public utilities, were often misunderstood.
But overall, he saw propaganda, his version of it, as positive.
He framed it as a vital force contributing to America's progress, even got into specifics like direct mail advertising, saying it needed a more fundamental, communication-focused approach.
He certainly spread his ideas widely. Theaters, libraries.
Yeah, advised the League of New York Theaters, the American Library Association on improving their public standing.
Yeah.
Talked about industrial relations, higher education's PR problems, using symbols effectively.
Yeah.
Even gave advice to the hat industry.
A hat industry. Okay.
Participated in panels on selling the American way of life. Talked about private interest versus public responsibility. Addressed financial advertisers on molding public opinion.
He was tireless.
Surveyed corporations on using internal newsletters, house organs, underscored how vital public opinion was in wartime, proposing that psychological general staff.
Psychological warfare at home.
Elements of it, yes. Planning, good governance, understanding community leaders. It all tied back to shaping opinion. Using all the channels, pushing for a free press, constantly researching public attitudes.
Labor relations, graphic arts, education.
Address them all, always linking it back to safeguarding democracy through informed or guided public opinion. Developed his engineering of consent concept more fully.
That's a famous phrase.
Yeah, very. He worried about polls leading us, talked about moral disarmament, consumer legislation. He interacted with figures like Ivy Lee, studied press agentry, worked with the NAACP.
He heard about the NAACP example.
Right. Even discussed humanizing figures like President Coolidge. The idea that we consent to narrowed choices through propaganda's influence. His WWI peace conference role, the Electric Light Jubilee campaign.
It's an incredible breadth of work and influence.
And of course, the sources cover his bio, the Freud connection, his uncle, his early, maybe more blunt views on conscious manipulation, versus his later focus on shaping actions to gain interest. Always learning, always promoting, right up to ideas on world peace and wartime radio.
Wow. Okay. So as we kind of come up for air after this deep dive into Bernays, a few things really stand out, don't they?
Definitely. We've seen how that word propaganda changed meaning, and we've wrestled with the really complex ethics around deliberately shaping what people think.
It's undeniable how deeply these ideas have seeped into, well, pretty much everything.
Yeah, how products are marketed, political strategies, social movements, even maybe the choices you make in your own life. It's everywhere once you start looking.
And that really leaves you, the listener, with something to chew on.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you have this insight into mechanics, the techniques of persuasion, how do you navigate that constant flood of information today?
Yeah, how do you tell the difference between genuine understanding and, manufactured consent?
What's your role as an informed person in this whole dynamic of shaping and understanding public opinion?
It's a big question. Definitely worth thinking about.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.